500 days into the war, and Ukraine has finally secured Turkey's backing for its NATO aspirations. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan expressed support for Ukraine. He said the war-torn country deserves to join the alliance while urging it to enter peace talks with Moscow. Zelensky met with Turkish President in Istanbul as part of a tour of NATO member countries ahead of the summit in Vilnius. He's aiming to push Ukraine's bid to join the military alliance after the war ends and secure additional weapons for his outmatched army.
Şüphesiz Ukrayna NATO'ya üyeliği hak ediyor. Her zaman ısrarla savunduğum bir hususu huzurlarınızda bir vesileyle tekrar vurgulamak istiyorum. Adil bir barışın kaybedeni olmaz. Taraflar arasındaki anlayış farklılıklarına rağmen barış arayışlarına bir an evvel geri dönülmesi en samimi arzumuzdur.
Zelensky and Erdogan also discussed the Black Sea grain deal and their hope for it to be extended. The United Nations brokered grain and fertilizer deal is currently due to expire on July 17th, while Russia threatened to quit the deal because several demands to export its own grain and fertilizer have not been met. Zelensky countered that Russia was blocking the movement of ships with food through corridors. He claimed that Russia behaves as if it owns the entire Black Sea, while hoping for a deal extension.
Звичайно, ми з паном президентом детально обговорили ситуацію в нашому Чорноморському регіоні, в Європі загалом. Маємо однакове бачення того, що ніхто не має права нав'язувати нашим державам і народам будь-що в Чорноморському регіоні, що не відповідає інтересам наших держав і народів. Чорне море має бути простором безпеки, співпраці, а не війни та будь-яких криз чи так званих заморожених конфліктів, які можуть в будь-який момент знов розпалитися та ударити по життю і по людям.
Meanwhile, NATO leaders are meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania next week. They are expected to reaffirm that Ukraine will join the alliance one day. The White House has said that Ukraine's proposed entrance into NATO will be discussed but not decided at the alliance's summit. Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Russian President Vladimir Putin will next month pay a visit to Turkey, the first time since the Kremlin launched its invasion of Ukraine 500 days ago. Retired Colonel Recep Tayyip is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Turkey and also a geopolitical analyst. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Colonel Recep, welcome to the program. I will begin with a very simple question. Why is Turkey seen as a rubber stamp authority for nations who are bidding to join the NATO?
Well, Eric, it's good to be with you. So the way that the North Atlantic Treaty was written, each of the members essentially has a veto on the entry of any new members. So at a certain point, it was, I think, 12 or 15 members. Now it's up over 30. But if any single NATO member objects to the entry of a new country, a candidate country, they have a right to hold that process up. In the case of Greece, for instance, they held up accession by North Macedonia for over a decade because of a naming convention, because Greece was felt that the use of the word Macedonia should be reserved for the Greeks, and that they could not have Republic of Macedonia admitted as such. So over a naming convention, Greece similarly held up accession for well over a decade. In the case of Turkey, Sweden, of course, has occupied the news with regards to Turkish objections to the lack of enforcement of counterterrorism provisions against supporters of the PKK, a recognized terror group that has targeted Turkey in the past. So that continues. So it's not really a rubber stamp, but it certainly is a veto right. In the case of Ukraine, the Turkish leadership has quietly, for quite some time now, expressed support for Ukrainian membership in NATO. So the fact that they came out and explicitly said so during Zelensky's visit really is not much of a surprise.
Colonel Rich, Turkey backing Ukraine to join the NATO comes at a very interesting moment where the US says that it doesn't want to give Ukraine high hopes of joining the alliance before the Vilnius summit. Why the dilemma?
Well, I think the Biden administration has been playing one sort of balance game, and with regards to escalation, and the Turks are playing an entirely different sort of game. From the beginning of this conflict, even prior to the Russian invasion, the most recent invasion, of course, they had started this in 2014, the Biden administration has been very slow to add new increments of weapons. They were slow to give the multiple launch rocket system, slow to approve the provision of tanks, and slow to provide cluster munitions, or DPICMs, as they're known in trade. So I think at each step, the Biden White House has been afraid or concerned about giving escalatory signals to Moscow. They want to say to Moscow, we're supporting Ukrainian defense, but we're not trying to escalate this to a pain level that would make you do something irrational. The Turks are playing an entirely different sort of balancing game. For them, it's literally life or death whether Ukraine survives as an entity. A Russian victory and absorption of Ukraine would represent the end of Turkish viability as a Black Sea power. Russia would have the dominant position in the coastline. So the Turks will go to the mat for Ukraine. And unlike the United States, which only started giving lethal aid in 2017, 2018, I think it might have actually been 2019 that the Trump administration started sending Javelin missiles. The Turks have been giving that for years. They have made very clear they will not allow Ukraine to be defeated and wiped off the mat militarily. So very different games, very different calculations. I think the Biden White House has been maybe a little bit too cautious by half.
So if Ukraine does indeed join the NATO, what will that mean for other countries like Sweden, which started bidding way before? And how is Russia likely to react to that?
Well, so in the case of Sweden, it's interesting. I don't think they actually expressed unambiguous interest until after the Russian invasion last year. I think that Sweden has traditionally been non-aligned militarily, and it was only after Moscow and Putin launched this irresponsible, aggressive war that they realized that's no longer a tenable position. Ukraine's been trying to get in since 2014, at least, since the first Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I think that the speed with which they get in, though, is really not the issue. The issue is what each country brings to the alliance militarily. Ukraine, if and when it joins, and I believe they will, perhaps not until after there's a peace agreement for this current war, is going to bring a massive, experienced military that knows how to provide deterrence vis-a-vis Russia. So that is far, far more valuable in military strategic terms than what Sweden can bring. Sweden's fine up on the northern flank of NATO, so to speak. There are some advantages of having Sweden in, but more than anything else, it broadens, both Sweden and Ukraine would broaden a space in which Putin simply cannot contemplate a new expansionist war.
All right, I've been talking to a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Turkey and also a geopolitical analyst, retired Colonel Rich Altzen. Thank you very much for talking to WION World is One today.
You're welcome, Eric. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.